doesn't know me, I'm Pam Helnick, and I am the conservation agent for Hudson. So I'm here to talk about the Wetlands Protection Bylaw that the Conservation Commission is asking town meeting to approve this fall. And so you probably, because I know the people here probably know this already, but just as a little background, every municipality in Massachusetts by law has a Conservation Commission. And the Conservation Commission has two main responsibilities. First and foremost is to protect wetlands and water bodies by enforcement of the state law, which is called the Wetlands Protection Act. And this includes permitting new projects that are near wetlands and water bodies, and also correcting violations, which are unpermitted alterations. And the Conservation Commission is also responsible for town conservation land. So many people don't realize what important resources wetlands are and what important functions they perform. But wetlands are natural sponges that absorb floodwater, so it doesn't end up in our basements and yards and streets. And as development increases, stormwater runoff increases, so wetlands are becoming increasingly important. The roots of wetland plants filter out pollutants and sediments, so they clean the stormwater before it reaches the rivers, streams, ponds, reservoirs. And wetlands also provide critical habitat for biodiversity, for wildlife, supporting biodiversity, and they create recreational opportunities. So protecting the wetlands themselves is, of course, very important, but it is also very important to protect the areas around the wetlands, which we call the buffer zone. Maintaining the buffer zone around the wetlands is critical to the wetland survival. If you remove the vegetation, it changes the light and temperature of the wetland, it changes the flow of water to the wetland, it impacts erosion into the wetland. So if you damage the buffer zone, the wetland can change or shrink or even disappear, even if the wetland itself is not disturbed by development. So the State Wetlands Protection Act is a state law that protects wetlands, the banks of streams and ponds, land underwater, the areas surrounding a river and floodplain. It establishes a 100-foot buffer zone around the wetlands, but it provides very limited protection in the buffer zone. Why does the Conservation Commission want a bylaw? As Hudson becomes more developed and there's less buildable land available, development is encroaching further into the buffer zone, and sometimes right to almost to the edge of the wetland itself. Also, the state law does not protect all wetlands. It doesn't protect small water bodies and isolated wetlands, and it gives towns very limited enforcement ability. So the majority of towns in Massachusetts, especially in the eastern part of the state where there's a lot of development, have local wetland protection bylaws to better protect their resources. So some of our most important natural resources in Hudson are already threatened by overdevelopment. So the Assabet River is classified as impaired, and both Fort Meadow Reservoir and Lake Boone both have problems with algal growth and invasive plants, abundance of invasive plant growth. The purpose of the Wetland Protection Bylaw would be to provide better protection for our wetland resources and to provide the Conservation Commission with better enforcement tools. The protection is improved by establishing a 25-foot no disturb zone and adding jurisdiction for isolated wetlands, small ponds, and vernal pools. In addition, the bylaw allows the Commission to consider cumulative impacts on climate change, impacts on biodiversity, and recreation values when permitting a project. And the other important thing the bylaw will do is give the Conservation Commission the ability to fine when violations of the bylaw occur. Under the State Wetlands Protection Act, only the state, the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, can fine. Mm-hmm. So the town has very little enforcement ability.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Or do you mind questions in the middle?
No, go right ahead.
What is the no disturb zone now?
Right now, the no disturb zone is a policy right now. It is not legally enforceable. Mm-hmm. We ask people to honor the 25-foot no disturb zone, and they do when it's convenient, but when they can't then they just go right into it. And the problem is that if the Conservation Commission were to deny a project because of the policy, they would appeal to Mass DEP, and the state will pretty much approve anything if it's in the buffer zone. They don't care if it's 25 feet away or 2 feet away, as long as they're not in the wetland. They've pretty much told me that.
So the buffer zone is 100? Ooh, a little.
Buffer zone is 100, which means that if you're doing work within 100 feet of a wetland, you need to apply for a permit. But sometimes only, like we can just say, well, you have to put up erosion control to protect the wetland. And if you're cutting down trees, you have to do some mitigation plantings. But we don't have legally enforceable ability to keep them 25 feet away. And 25 feet's not that much.
So it's 25 feet back is a no disturb, and then adding 75 feet makes 100 feet of buffer.
That's
zone?
right.
Okay,
That's right.
thank you.
Yeah.
So going on from there, the most important thing that the bylaw will do is to establish a 25-foot no disturb zone around wetlands and water bodies. 25 feet may sound like a lot, but really it's not very much. I mean, we were just at a project around Lake Boone yesterday, and they have a 30-foot no disturb zone. But when you're actually looking at it, it's not all that much, but it is critically important to protect the wetlands. It is the most important, as I said before, how the vegetation along the edge of the wetland controls the light and the stormwater reaching the wetland, the temperature of the wetland, the erosion into the wetland, the habitat value of the wetland, and that first 25 feet obviously is the most critical area. The bylaw would allow you to still do all the things you've enjoyed doing near the water, and in fact, one of the values that we've added to protect is recreation values. So docks, retaining walls, and other water-related projects are exempt from the 25-foot no disturb. They can be permitted the same way they've always been permitted in the past. You can maintain any existing structures and lawn and vegetation, and you can plant new native vegetation and remove invasive vegetation in the buffer zone.
The maintain existing lawn and vegetation, does that include using fertilizer?
So officially, nobody is really supposed to use fertilizer in the buffer zone or in the first 100 feet of the riverfront area. Whenever I issue an order of conditions, I put that as a condition in perpetuity. However, it is impossible to enforce. We don't have a fertilizer police going around on weekends seeing if people are fertilizing their lawn that's, up against a wetland or against one of the lakes. So it is very difficult to enforce, but no, they should not. They should not be using fertilizer.
Yeah.
They can mow the lawn, they can reseed the lawn, but they should absolutely not use fertilizer.
And that's within 100 feet.
We ask people not to fertilize in the buffer zone or the first 100 feet of riverfront area, but again,
No enforcement.
there's really no way to enforce
But
it.
this would allow you to enforce it.
There's two things, if I can jump in. So I think
Yeah,
one
who
is,
are you? I'm sorry, I don't.
I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission. Hi, I'm Jimmy Martin, for anybody else.
Actually, we should introduce
Yeah.
Jimmy,
So-
Heidi, and Brooke are all from the Conservation Commission here, and Jimmy is the chair.
Yeah, so I think an important thing that we're trying to really just maintain here is that enforcement is difficult today. Enforcement on bigger issues, things that are clearly visible, like not following through with something that was on an order of conditions becomes more enforceable. Dumping in a wetland, stuff like that. Fertilizing will always be difficult because it's one of those things that it could happen and you never see it. However, one of the big values of the 25-foot buffer, like the additional buffer zone, is that the hope is that if somebody does fertilize, there's that additional vegetation that is helping reduce the amount of runoff into a water body, whether it's a Lake Boone, for example, which has, already has issues with cytotoxins and blooms, and then abundance of phosphates and sometimes nitrogen buildup. So these things it's kind of vitally important, this 25-foot no disturb to happen. Regardless of whether or not fertilizer is used, it does help improve the wetlands. As much as a tool that finding would be to help with those those gross violations, there still would not be the manpower to go around and just keep an eye on every
what you cannot do in the no disturb zone, you cannot add new pavement or structures, you cannot clear existing natural vegetation, or use pesticides or fertilizers on your lawn in the no disturb zone. So it's the law. We enforce as best we can. Certainly, if somebody is mowing down natural vegetation, we can say stop or we'll fine you. It's a little harder to catch somebody fertilizing, but we hope.
You can see the results though.
Yeah. The bylaw will not impact existing conditions or structures. It will not allow the Conservation Commission to make a larger no disturb zone in its regulations. It will not add local filing fees, and it will not allow the commission or its agent to trespass on private property. The bylaw will not prevent new development, but it will help ensure that new development is done in an environmentally friendly way. So I'm just going to finish up with a quick overview of the most important sections of the bylaw. That cheat sheet there on the back does have all the different sections of the bylaw with a little summary of what they are. Section 1 expands the wetland functions and values that are protected, adding erosion and sedimentation control, water quality, rare species habitat for both plants and animals, agriculture and aquaculture, biodiversity, impacts from climate change, and recreation. Section 3 expands the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction, adding isolated wetlands, vernal pools, and small ponds, and establishing the 25-foot no disturb zone. Section 4 lists a number of exemptions and exceptions from the bylaw, and it allows for additional exemptions to be established in the bylaw regulations. So a number of minor activities in the buffer zone and riverfront area are exempt from filing under the bylaw, including routine mowing, maintenance of existing structures, addition of unpaved walkways and certain fencing and accessory structures, planting non-invasive vegetation, and pruning shrubs and trees. Section 5 explains the administration of the bylaw. It allows for certain tree removals and new fencing to be approved administratively, and allows waivers under certain conditions. Waivers may be granted if there are no reasonable alternatives, if avoidance, minimization, and mitigation have been employed to the maximum extent feasible, or if the waiver is necessary to accommodate an overriding public interest or avoid an unconstitutional taking without compensation. Section 6 gives the Conservation Commission the ability to enact regulations to clarify implementation of the bylaw. These require public notice and public hearings before passage, and they cannot be inconsistent with the bylaw. So because the 25-foot no disturb zone is defined in the bylaw, it cannot be expanded in the regulations. And we did that on purpose so that people would not have that concern. And finally, Section 9 establishes the ability to fine for violations of the bylaw. A violation is considered new each day that it's not addressed. This encourages people to address things immediately. The fines are $100 per violation for the first offense, $200 for the second offense, and $300 for the third and subsequent offenses.
Can I just ask about the enforcement? Because I think that was one of the things that came up when this was discussed before. Mm-hmm. So specifically the fining, you're saying every day is a new offense. Mm-hmm. So if I attempt to address it, are you now going to continue to fine until it's... you need to make that clear, I would say, because otherwise the way that I look at this is if it took me a week to get done whatever needed to get done, I would be fined $100 the first day, $200 the second day, and then $300 for the next 5 days. So that would be $1,800. And I think that people are going to blow their top if that's the way that you're going to enforce it.
Yes. So it's new every day.
If left unaddressed.
But if I send the letter of violation and the violation says you need to call me or email me and discuss how to get this into compliance, and if you don't call by X date, if you don't contact me by X date, then fines will start to accrue until you do. So that, you know, that's how they would work. Similarly, if once they talk to the commission and the commission says, you dumped all this stuff in the wetlands and you have to now remove all this stuff, and we're going to give you 3 months to get it all done, whatever is decided, and then in those 3 months nothing happens, then again, the fines will start after those 3 months, and then the fine will continue every day until something starts to happen. So, you know, people hopefully will have a little more incentive to, you know, to remedy the violations.
Yeah, and I think that's great and correct. I just want to make sure that people understand the way that you're talking about it and the
Yeah.
way that you describe it versus how I might read it if I
No,
didn't
it's
hear
a good
that.
point, and that's how it's worded, and that's the standard wording in all the wetlands bylaws. I mean, you know, but agreed. I mean, it does allow, you know, people could do very unreasonable things, but in all honesty, if a commission does unreasonable fines and the person doesn't pay the fines and it goes to court, the judge would not make them pay it. If
And I think it was
unreasonable.
partly just because of the way that you stated it at the beginning, and maybe you could just be clearer when you speak about it so that
Okay.
it isn't day 1, then day 2, then day 3. It's you're given some time to remediate, and then the fines kick in if you
Okay.
don't.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, it's for non-compliance,
Right.
once you've been notified.
It's
I wanted to ask, so the big thing for us is whenever if there's anything currently right now where we've had a violation, there's a request to either get in contact with the agent, but then there's a plan for mitigating with the issues and then getting in compliance, right? In the case, I won't use any specific names or events. In the case that somebody just ignores it, that's one of those scenarios where it's I would say there would be malicious non-compliance, and this is something where this might become a tool. Now, if they came in and they said, hey, I can't deal with this in the next 3 days, I can't deal with this today, but here's the steps I'm taking, that is being in compliance, right? That is doing the most immediate things that need to be remedied first, and it's putting up an erosion control. That is it's usually an easy thing to do, and most of the times that would be the type of thing you'd have to see, like putting in erosion controls. Or if you start encroaching into an area that you're not supposed to work, it's stopping work and then reseeding with native vegetation. A lot of times this is simple stuff that can be remedied pretty quick. The problem is when we find larger issues where something has been filled in, it's there's been some damage that really needs to be remediated. That this tool would, you talk about the second or third offenses, but in many cases, we're going to work with people because it doesn't benefit us to just find people who are actually trying to do the right thing and fix a scenario.
You know, honestly, we don't want to fine people. We don't even keep the fine money. It just goes into the general fund. It's really just a tool when people just continue to do these violations and just ignore us. And the only tool we had in the past is to go to the state and report it to the state and ask the state to step in and fine. And they only, there's a lot of towns, and they're only going to get involved if it's a really egregious, or if it's on their land, as we've learned. But this will allow us to have some teeth. That's all. It's not that we want to use it. What we want, first of all, is for there not to be violations, or if there are violations, that we hope are just because people are making an honest mistake because they didn't know the law or they didn't know they had a wetland, that they'll just work with us to fix it. And that's what we really hope. But unfortunately, we do have situations where that just doesn't happen.
At the end of the day, we don't want to fine. What we want to do is make sure that we are working in the interest of the act.
Yeah.
Right, protecting the wetlands, protecting the resources, and protecting the valuable habitats.
Yeah, and the argument that I have gotten in the past is that, well, this commission doesn't want to fine, but what if some future commission wants to fine? Yes and no, but really, again, the fine doesn't benefit the commission. fine doesn't go to the commission, it goes into the general fund. The fine is literally just a tool when all else fails to try to get people to have a little more incentive to come into compliance. And that's all it is. It's not a way to try to get money. We don't get the money. It's just a tool to try to get, people who are are not working with us. We'd rather just work with people. In summary, the Wetlands Protection Bylaw would enable Hudson to better protect its valuable resources, and the Conservation Commission asks you to please come to town meeting in the high school auditorium on November 20th at 7:30 and vote for the bylaw.